What do they want us to believe and what are they trying to hide? And who is they? So that's what led me on my whole COVID journey. And so Casey and Calley means people who are supporting RFK Jr. in particular started passing around this video and saying how wonderful it was and how amazing it was. And somehow they started to be regarded as leaders in the medical freedom movement, which had been rebranded MAHA. And they also looked like a Psy-op to me. You don't just pick up the phone and call RFK, especially not 2 hours after the major presidential candidate has nearly been assassinated. You don't also then call Tucker Carlson and then just like broker that deal. Then you don't get put on every major podcast, Tucker Carlson, Joe Rogan, etc., and get paraded around as this medical freedom leader. They were actually doing what was being done all over the place. And that is saying that all of the issues that we saw with COVID and then with the vaccines were actually the same exact thing that's caused by this chronic disease epidemic that's been going on forever. And so therefore we can't attribute anything to the vaccines. COVID is not because of Trump. Trump was one thing, but there's a much, much huger agenda at play that got revealed during COVID. Casey and Calley means are a manifestation of that enormous infrastructure that's in place. It's global, and it is much, much, much more dangerous than just wanting to get rid of Trump.
I'm Dr. Randy Bach, and I'm honored today to have with us Debbie Lerman. She's a Brownstone Fellow and a Substack writer, science writer by trade, as well as a visual artist. And she brings all those talents to bear on the means of production, and frankly, more likely the production of the means. In this case, Calley means and Casey means, who have had a meteoric rise, although meteors also fall, depending where you are. It's all an Einsteinian perspective issue, but we're not going to do that. So tell us, who are Calley and Casey means for those people who have, say, not followed MAHA so much, and or Tucker Carlson, and or stuff going on now for HHS. So Debbie, thank you for coming on. And just as a pre-footnote, I suppose as a header, she has an article out on her Substack on this topic, so we're going to look at that a little bit later. But Debbie, what prompted you to write about Calley and Casey means, Dr. Casey means, and Mr. Calley means, siblings and Stanford Associated Health interested parties?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I decided to write about Casey and Calley means because they reminded me, surprisingly perhaps, of Deborah Birx. And I don't know if you remember Deborah Birx.
I actually came up with Scarf Ace.
The scarf lady.
Well, yeah, if you put Scarf, she's an ace, she was a top, and she had red words. So I call her Scarface.
Scarface. Oh, I like that. Okay, so Scarface. So Scarface lady, she was my entry into the never-ending rabbit holes of the global COVID control mechanisms. So before COVID, I was completely naive and was a card-carrying, very loyal Democrat, New York Times reader, NPR listener, all that stuff. And then COVID came and I realized that everybody was lying and everything was fake and I couldn't understand what was happening at all. So for a while it was very hard for me. And then I found Brownstone, the Brownstone Institute, and I started writing articles for Brownstone about COVID. And I started investigating what was happening and why it was happening, because I knew that what we were being told was false. I just didn't know why we were being told false things. And so I read Deborah Birx's book, Silent Invasion, and it was really the first nonfiction book that I'd read forever, because I only read fiction. I'm an English major. And it turned out that it was all fiction. And so it
doesn't really qualify as nonfiction then.
Yeah, exactly. It really doesn't.
Keep your record clean.
But it's kind of as boring as a nonfiction book. And so reading that book made me realize that she that her credentials, her backstory for how she became the US government's COVID task force coordinator, all the science that she was talking about, all of it was false, all of it was lies, and I had to figure out why. What do they want us to believe, and what are they trying to hide, and who is they? So that's what led me on my whole COVID journey. And so Casey and Calley means, strangely, when I listened to the Tucker podcast, which was in August of 2024, and which sort of catapulted them onto the national stage, at least in a certain group. I mean, I would say a lot of people in the country have never heard of them, but people who were sort of paying attention to medical freedom issues, people who were supporting RFK Jr. in particular, started passing around this video and saying how wonderful it was and how amazing it was. The first time I listened to it, I found it very uninteresting and uninspiring. I didn't understand why anybody was excited about it, but I didn't pay too much attention to it. Then they started just being everywhere, and somehow they started to be regarded as leaders in the medical freedom movement, which had been rebranded MAHA, Make America Healthy Again. That was a rebrand that was done after RFK Jr. stopped running for president, which I thought was a mistake and which I was very sad about. So I didn't understand why these completely anonymous people had become so prominent. And they also looked like a Psy-op to me, just because I have become very sensitive to Psy-ops ever since Deborah Birx. And so I very, very briefly looked into their background, like 5 minutes, kind of looked up their bios and stuff. And I saw things that were so obviously not aligned with what a real medical freedom fighter would actually have as their background. And then I just felt compelled, because once I start going down rabbit holes, I can't stop. And I spent several weeks torturing myself by going down every Casey and Calley means related rabbit hole that I could find or that I stumbled into, listening to every podcast, looking into their parents, looking into their backgrounds, finding out that, yes, indeed, just like with Deborah Birx, their backgrounds were fake or manufactured or exaggerated, that what they were saying about themselves was not true, that the reason that they were leading or so-called leading the movement were also not true, and that there were deep state, or I suspect deep state, actors behind them, just like with Deborah Birx. Because with Deborah Birx, what ended up happening is I found out that she was actually appointed by the National Security Council, and that she wasn't appointed as a public health official. She was appointed as a security state liaison for COVID, because it was the security state that was running COVID. The same people who were doing that are running Casey and Calley, in my opinion. So, yes, so this is exactly what my article is about. Exactly what I just said, the disconnect between their backgrounds and their position in the health freedom or medical freedom movement, all of the lies and stories about, okay, so this is very specific. I didn't mention this. When I started looking into them, I was shocked to realize that Calley Means, who's supposed to be this medical freedom guy who talks about Ozempic and about how Coca-Cola bribed the NAACP and how we have to fix every chronic disease known to man, and especially our children, we must save our children. So this guy actually was on the phone with RFK Jr. 2 hours after Trump was nearly assassinated in Butler, PA, telling RFK that if he joined Trump, he might be vice president or something. And then after he hung up with Trump, after he hung up with RFK, he immediately called Tucker Carlson, who then called Trump, who then set up a call, and, they started brokering this deal. So, that makes me suspect that this person has some other kind of source of authority other than the fact that he wrote a book about, food and chronic disease, and that he is supposedly talks about the chronic disease epidemic, which he only really started talking about in 2024. So there's something else, because you don't just pick up the phone and call RFK, especially not 2 hours after the major presidential candidate has nearly been assassinated, and you don't get an answer. Not only that, you don't also then call Tucker Carlson and then just like broker that deal. Then you don't get put on every major podcast, Tucker Carlson, Joe Rogan, etc., and get paraded around as this medical freedom leader. And most shockingly of all, I discovered that in RFK Jr.'s speech, which I would say was one of, if not the most important of his career, where he said, okay, I'm not running for president anymore, even though that was a Herculean effort I don't know about millions, but many, many tens of thousands of people participated in trying to get him on ballots in every state. And he really created a movement behind him. In that speech where he said, okay, sorry guys, all this work that we've been doing and all this effort and money that we've been pouring into it, nope, not doing that. I'm actually going to go with Donald Trump, who I've always said that I hate and revile and who I have only said bad things about in the past. By the way, in the middle of the speech where I'm telling you this and where I'm talking from the heart about my father and my uncle and about, the things that are wrong with this country and what I think we need to change, all of a sudden, there's this strange point where, and I'm going to switch from first person because I was pretending to be RFK, but where RFK...
For our audience at home, you're not actually RFK Jr.
Right, yeah.
Just you have kind of the hair, but...
Just to clarify, right? So in the middle of the speech, right at the midpoint, after saying really heartfelt and authentic things, suddenly RFK Jr. starts telling this very detailed story about how this guy named Calley called him 2 hours after Trump was nearly assassinated and told him that he should join with Trump, and then that happened. So that felt strange to me, because why would you tell a story about this unknown person brokering this deal? All you have to say is, I'm going with Trump. But not only did he say that, he said a few other things. He said Calley is the leading advocate for food safety, soil regeneration, and ending the chronic disease epidemic. The leading advocate. Now, that is so gross of an overstatement to the point of being false, because maybe he's an advocate. He has been for a few months now, but he's never talked about soil regeneration. Maybe 2 seconds he's ever talked about that. And the fact that in this incredibly monumental and important historical speech, RFK Jr. felt the need to state that, there it is, Calley is arguably the leading advocate for food safety, for soil regeneration, for ending the chronic disease epidemic that is destroying America's health and ruining our economy. Calley has exposed the insidious corruption at the FDA, the NIH, the HHS, and the USDA. Such an overstatement that it's just hard to say. It's hard to explain how much of an overstatement that is, to the point, again, of being false. So why would RFK Jr. even do that? That just makes no sense in this speech. Then he goes on to say, you should really listen to the Tucker Carlson podcast with Casey and Calley. I would urge you, there it is, right in the middle of the speech, I would urge you to view Tucker Carlson's recent interview with Calley and his sister, Dr. Casey, who was the top graduate of her class at Stanford Medical School. Not true. Okay, so he says, not true.
We don't know it's not true yet. You just haven't had any corroboration.
I haven't. Well, I know I can't find any proof of it. So on Casey's LinkedIn page, where she says that she got her medical degree, there's no statement that she was the top graduate. She does state all the other awards that she got as an undergraduate and stuff. There's no statement anywhere on Stanford's website at her graduation. Nothing that I could find that states that. I tried to fact check it with Harvard, and they have not responded to me.
I'm not trying to throw thumbtacks in your way. I'm just saying that there's how many kids? Let's say there's 200 kids in the class, or adults. There's a 1 in 200 chance she is number one. But the fact that she would never tell anybody else except RFK privately is kind of odd. I mean, there's an old joke.
Yeah, you're right. So okay, so officially, I don't have the statement that says that it's false, but I don't have anything that says that it's true.
Yeah, maybe Joe maybe Joe Biden told her that. He graduated top in his class as well. So
But
say
let's say even if it was true, why would this person, RFK Jr., in this moment in his life, in this speech, give a qualification for a totally irrelevant, unknown person who's done absolutely, literally nothing on the national stage or anywhere of importance up to the point of his speech? Why would he do that? That's what really got me. Then I thought something is so, so wrong here. And that's really what made me want to write the article, because I realized that either RFK Jr. was saying things he knew to be untrue or exaggerated, or he had
so
to say them.
I'm
I
gonna
don't
let
know.
you go on, but I'm gonna just be devil's advocate at
Yeah.
this minor, first intermission, like in a hockey game. Um, the so let's just say that Calley means Mr. Calley means, I like to say Mr. and Doctor, because she's going to be Dr. Ms. Their names are so confusingly similar, and a
She
lot of
has
times.
suspended her license, so I don't know if she's still officially a doctor.
Okay, well, whatever. So we'll call him maybe he and she. But anyway, Calley, Mr. Calley, let's just say he had a really good idea. At the moment of the assassination, I think everybody in the U.S. and probably elsewhere just assumed Trump would, having survived this, he can survive anything, and he's going to roll over Joe Biden at the time, and whoever else the Democrats might throw in his way. So it seems like a politically expedient moment, and probably an idea not unique to Calley Means, that everybody should get out of the way, and Trump's going to win. And the best way to kind of get something out of this, to make lemonade out of a potential lemon for your own campaign, is to hang on and go with Trump. So it's not necessarily an impossible idea. It's not something I think that was unique to Calley Means to think of it. Now, it seems to be the intimation that he had coordinated with Donald Trump in advance, and there's no evidence that he was really in the Trump camp, or vice
Oh, there
versa.
is.
Oh,
There
there
is.
is. He was in the Trump
Oh, there
camp
is.
person. Yeah, I'm not aware.
In the speech, RFK Jr.
No, I
says,
know, but from Trump himself, there's not necessarily evidence that he was in Trump's inner circle. So let's just say he kind of took a kind of a Gatsbyan leap of faith, and presented himself somewhat aggrandizedly as that guy who could be the fixer. And so he's a Stanford guy, probably a bright guy, Stanford undergrad and business and so forth. And so maybe he just saw this moment to help the Means name, and him and his sister, or him alone, whatever. And he had, let's just hypothesize, he had RFK Jr.'s ear from his or their book, Good Energy, and it aligned with RFK's theme about health and whatever. Let's say they just had a lot in common on being fit and healthy, and picking the right foods and whatever. And so let's assume that he had met RFK Jr. and they got along and so forth. I mean, he's a nice looking guy, and why not? The question is, why did RFK Jr. aggrandize those things? Did he get those things from the Means individually, or did he kind of like, just have a moment of, being in the spotlight, and he hasn't been a natural politician his whole life, even though despite the name per se. I don't think he's run for office or whatever. And maybe he just kind of took a little Biden-ian kind of flight of fancy at the moment. I don't know. But do all those things imply malfeasance or CIA or whatever? Because I think it's explainable, possibly in the realm of just humans being humans.
well, if you think that just random people have RFK Jr.'s number in their cell
I
phone
don't
and
know.
that he's going to answer,
Yeah, I
uh,
don't know. So let me ask you specifically. So did RFK Jr. and the Means um, communicate, pursuant to their book? I don't know what kind of, reception the book got in early phases of RFK Jr. campaign. Were there any kind of interactions between them historically prior? I have no answer. I don't know about this.
so in the Danny Jones, so there's several important podcasts. There's the Tucker podcast, there's a Joe Rogan podcast, and there's the Danny Jones podcast. The Danny Jones podcast, Danny Jones is a weird character, and I'm not even going to go into what I think about him, but he hosted two doctors and Calley after one of the doctors, and I always forget all their names. So one of them was Jack Cruz and Mary Bowden. So Mary Bowden is an important person in the medical freedom movement because she was persecuted and harassed and fired for doing what she thought was ethically correct during COVID. and became an important medical freedom fighter. And Jack Cruz is a crazy guy who has all kinds of ideas, but also spoke out against COVID. And he was, I guess, I'm not on Twitter, so I don't know firsthand what he said on Twitter, but apparently he was posting a bunch of stuff about Calley, questioning the things that I'm questioning about Calley's background, about how he became this guy, how he came out of nowhere, why he was claiming to be leader of Maha and stuff like that. And so this guy, Danny Jones, put them on his podcast for 3.5 hours. It was excruciating. And they tried to question Casey and Casey wasn't there. Casey's the girl, Calley, the boy. They tried to question him about all of this and how he managed to broker the deal that we're talking about. And he was so squirrely, you just
Yeah,
cannot
you
believe
actually
it.
bring that up. I'll see if I can pop that up for people.
So actually, his
Yeah.
answers are very revealing, and also his answers are very contradictory. Because he says, I didn't talk to Trump, I didn't talk to RFK, but RFK says in his speech that he was advising Trump. Calley was advising Trump and advising RFK. And RFK says, Calley has been advising me since the beginning of my campaign. And Calley says, oh, I didn't really talk to him. We had a loosey-goosey kind of relationship. You know, we went on some podcasts together. We had some shared interests or whatever. So he basically just contradicts everything that RFK says, which is that not only was Calley, yeah, there it is, like very loose with Kennedy. Like we're like, and he stutters and he, you know, even though he's a very well-spoken and suave guy, when he's answering questions about this, he gets very flustered. Another very telling moment was actually on the Joe Rogan podcast, which is that when Joe Rogan asked him to explain it, he was like, well, that reminds me of when my mom died. And and then he started talking about his mom for like a minute, and then he started talking about other stuff for another minute, and then he like kind of mumbled his way through trying to explain, and then he just moved on. So I think that the fact that he's also very not forthcoming, contradictory, and squirrely about it is another kind of telling aspect of how he did it. If he just came right out and said what you said, and he tries to say it, he says, I will a lowly supporter from my lowly perch, as a lowly supporter, I was able to see what happened. Yeah, there it is. There's the story about my mom suddenly. And then he said, I just felt the need to call Robert. Now, that to me is a tell, because if I were to be one of these lowly supporters who just had an epiphany, like you said, and oh my gosh, I think it would be really great if RFK got together with Trump. I wouldn't really be calling him Robert probably unless we were like on a first name basis. Kind of takes some intimacy to be on a first name basis with a politician like that. And then he says, I had this vision and we were in a sweat tent, which is just another extremely bizarre image.
Well,
I don't know what he was doing in a sweat
I
tent
don't think
with
that's.
RFK.
Yeah, I think that's sort of in keeping with the healthy, buff, kind of young old guy that Mr. Kennedy is. He presents himself as vigorous and muscular and whatnot. So I don't discount the fact that RFK Jr. could have been in a sweat tent.
No,
But
it's just with Calley Means. Of course, he could be in a sweat tent every day. Why
well,
was he in a sweat tent
somebody else
with
is going to
Calley
be in it.
Means?
So my only question is given the book, the Good Energy book, I don't know how big a following that had at the time, and whether it was on
So
Mr.
there's
Kennedy.
no at the time. It was in May of 2024.
Oh, that's
So
when it came out.
the
Okay.
book came out in May of 2024. It had no following amongst anyone who knows anything about anything. It had a big following amongst New York Times self-help book readers, which was the category in which it was a bestseller. So it had zero. Well, I'm not aware of anybody who would ever quote it or say anything about it, except for Tucker Carlson, which leads me to the other very suspicious background story exaggeration that also made me very suspicious. And that was when Tucker Carlson introduced Casey and Calley on his podcast, which is where they burst onto the scene. And he said to them in this extremely breathless, very strange, over the top thing that's not usual for Tucker Carlson, at least in the things that I've seen him in, and I'm not a huge follower, but I've seen a lot of his interviews. He says, and I have to say, I just have to say this. I never say this, but I have to say this to you. This book is going to change the course of the country, he
Hmm.
says. He
Oh,
can't possibly believe that
I wish you'd say
unless
that.
he's never looked at it.
Huh.
Yeah. So he
Well,
gets
that's
very, very breathless. He also lies about Casey, the girl, about her background and about her backstory. Because her backstory is so I'm going to go back to Deborah Birx and do a comparison here. When people are planted intentionally in a role and come from a place that they don't want you to know about, they make up a story or they present a story as if there's some kind of family uh, thing that happened to them that was so compelling and emotional that it just led them to have to be in this position. And then when they tell that story, it immediately gets put on every mainstream media outlet on the face of the planet. So with Deborah Birx, she told the story that her mom had to go through her life, or maybe her grandmom had to go through life with a huge sense of guilt because she had brought the Spanish flu home and killed her mother. And that's what inspired Deborah Birx to be the COVID task force coordinator. Okay, now she had never done infectious disease. She was working on AIDS. She worked for USAID, which is a CIA cutout. So she had nothing to do with infectious disease, like flu-like diseases or anything like that ever. So the story that was perfectly timed and also perfectly told to correspond exactly with her message, which was, we got to protect grandma. And that's why we all have to wear masks and lock down and not let the kids go out to play in the playground. So the Casey and Calley means have that exact same perfect story that I think is questionable about their mother. But another story that Casey has, which is her other perfect origin story, is that she was doing a residency in
surgery.
in
Oh,
surgery, right? In ear and head and neck surgery, ear and whatever you
yeah.
call it,
E-
surgery,
ENT.
ENT surgery. And she quit in the last year because she realized that the medical system is terrible. And she
That's,
was so,
that's like out of 5 years, like 4.5 years in, she realized that. It's
right.
mm, like to be fair, I did not complete a residency in psychiatry, but I realized that in the first year. um,
Yeah.
but
Well, I can tell you my husband, who was, practicing oncologist, hematologist for 15 years, realized it the entire time. So most people in the system realize that it sucks, and they realize that they're treating patients as body parts and not as whole people. And they realize that, the incentives are for people to be sick, and the incentives of the pharmaceutical industry and the medical industrial complex are to keep people sick and not to get them healthy. I mean, these are like truisms that we all know about and we've been talking about for decades. So these are the things that Casey suddenly realized in that moment when she was operating on somebody and she was like, I can't cut into another person's mucosal membrane because
well, it
of
depends.
this
I don't
terrible thing.
I don't walk down the street, endeavoring to cut into people's mucosal membranes, but it depends what it is. Like if there's an issue there, if somebody has, I don't know, a shotgun wound in their mucosal membrane, then yeah, do it. Or if
Well,
they've
no,
got
she admitted, no, it wasn't because she was doing it because there was no need for it, but because the cause, she never got taught in medical school that the underlying cause of everything is metabolic dysfunction.
oh
And which means bad health. And bad health is causing bad health. And it's
no.
causing, all these syndromes. So anyway, but what's the problem with this story? This did not occur at Stanford. She went to she did her surgical residency at Oregon. I always get this wrong. An Oregon not state, Oregon hospital, something or other. It's
Yeah.
the only public medical education institution or in Oregon, I think, or it's one of them. But
Uh,
anyway, uh,
OHS, Oregon Health and Science,
OHSU, is that it?
Oregon Health and Science University.
Oregon Health and Science University. Thank you, because I had never heard of it before, but it's a top place. So she was doing it there, and she quit. And her story about quitting is that, yeah, there it is, that she was operating on this woman, and sometimes it's a woman, sometimes it's a kid, And she suddenly realized the medical system sucks. And so she marched into her chairperson's office, dropped her scalpel on the desk, and quit. Now, Tucker Carlson tells the story, and she does not correct him. And he says, when you quit your Stanford when you quit your Stanford training after 9 years of medical training at Stanford and walked into your Stanford chairman's office and dropped the scalpel on the desk on your 30th birthday, not on your, he says that. And then she says, yes, on my 30th birthday, I walked into my chairman's office and dropped my scalpel. Now, there's many inaccuracies or lies here. One is it was not her 30th birthday, it was her 31st birthday. Second of all, it was not Stanford. No, seriously, because they're telling their story in a way that's crafted to make it dramatic. And she doesn't correct him. Like if I had a credential, right, from a medical university, or I went to a certain institution and somebody said, so I happened to graduate from Harvard. So if somebody had said to me, yeah, when you got your, English degree from Stanford, I would say, no, actually it was from Harvard.
Yeah, no, I get.
I mean, obviously I wouldn't let that
No,
go.
I actually, just a quick anecdote. In the before times, I used to go to these networking events, and I had a little tech startup in the 20 teens, and a lot of this is Cambridge, Massachusetts, where this was, and people would say, I'm a Yaley, so I went to the kind of the rival. Back in New Haven. So anyway, when people would say, "Oh, I'm at Harvard doing da da da," I would like play stupid, which is not that hard for me, and I would say, "Is that Harvard? Is that one of the community colleges?" And they'd be like so inflamed over it. It's like Harvard, Harvard. Oh yeah, no, I've seen it. What do they make? What do they make? Is that like a plumbing company? It's like, no, it's Harvard. Anyway, I mean, you can't carry that too far. But the community college one, I did try that a few times. They're like, no, it's not a community college. It's Harvard. Anyway, yeah, everybody does know. And,
Yeah.
so if you get it right, yes, I understand that. Like I went to Yale, but for medical school, people say, "Oh, you went to Yale for you learn all your Like, well, no, not quite. I went elsewhere. I went to, in my case, University of Rochester for medical school. Whatever. It's not the same thing. It doesn't quite have the same cachet. I think it's a great medical school, but at the time, but it's not the same thing. Those are different things. So OHSU is not the same as Stanford, and what I'm not sure what functional medicine is either. That little degree you mentioned there.
It's not a degree, it's a certificate.
Yeah.
And it's just one of these, like holistic, healthy living kinds of things. Like let's metabolically be healthy, meaning let's be healthy.
Okay. So I apologize for interrupting you about Harvard, OHSU. You want to carry on there or
I was just mentioning that as another reason. So you were being a very good devil's advocate. And so I was just mentioning other instances in which these weird
right.
and
Like,
strange people,
yeah.
these people coming out of nowhere, and these very powerful figures who all actually came together on the night of Trump's almost assassination to broker this deal. They are all doing the same thing in trying to make these people seem like they are something that they're not. And here's another important thing about them. Before 2024, they did absolutely nothing except for this, metabolic health diet stuff that had anything to do with medical freedom or COVID. Now, very importantly, during COVID, they did not just nothing, but they created companies that made lots and lots and lots of money um, because of the shift in the economy towards the digital and towards the online, and away from the brick and mortar, and also the shift towards surveillance and the shift towards all of the online stuff that we know about. And so Calley, sorry, the guy, was invested in a whole bunch of companies, all having to do with digital data gathering and monitoring, also a lot of psychedelics, which is another interesting topic we can talk about. And Casey after she did her scalpel dropping and learned about some holistic practice, was treating patients and mostly, talking about good nutrition and sleep and all the things that we know, and exercise that you need to get in order to be healthy. So just random people that had nothing to do with anything. In fact, they were not just doing nothing. They were actually doing what I think was intentional and which was being done all over the place. And that is saying that all of the issues that we saw with COVID and then with the vaccines were actually the same exact thing that's caused by this chronic disease epidemic that's been going on forever. And so therefore we can't attribute anything to the vaccines. And during COVID, their main complaint was that we should be focused on healthy eating and we shouldn't be focused on anything else. They didn't say anything about any of the atrocities, about any of the lies or if Casey was really someone who quit the medical system because she thought it was corrupt, and then she never called out any medical system corruptions during COVID, it's just too much of a contradiction to be benign.
You mentioned here, this is during COVID lockdowns and vaccine mandates, Casey did not post, speak, or write anything against the pandemic response, except to argue that all our ills are caused by metabolic dysfunction and Joe Biden should declare food and nutrition war. She didn't get canceled, unlike Mary Talley Bowden and many others, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, so forth. She didn't get canceled, shadow banned, or lose her job and so forth. So I mean, I'm a tiny molecule or a little cork on this ocean, but I didn't rub shoulders whatever with those, but all along it seemed very obvious to me that this was no pun intended in a sense, overkill, and clearly there was no prior vaccination, and so flu seasons tend to be probably somewhat tempered by the fact that we have a fair number of flu shots around and people with some immunity. But head to head, if you could be naive to the Spanish flu in 2018 or naive to the coronavirus in 2019, or maybe 100 years later, I would much rather get the coronavirus than the Spanish flu uninitiated and so forth, naive. So I think it's not really on a par with the severe influenzas unvaccinated. But that being said, it was very rare in the medical world that people were mentioning that. Now, in Casey's case, it sounds as if she wasn't a practicing physician per se. She had done all these other things. Maybe you can
she was doing holistic treatment of, I don't know exactly what she was doing. She was doing holistic treatment and going on podcasts and talking about food.
Is that part of functional medicine, as it were?
Yeah. Functional medicine is like it's like treat the person, the whole person, talk about nutrition, talk about exercise.
Right. So, as a side note, are you feeling any better by having spent the last 40 minutes with me talking about health and nutrition?
I feel better talking about the meanses.
So I feel as if that has worked. I mean, I'm not going to take credit. I'm not going to charge you for this visit.
You're doing a good job. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I just want to put it out there that, functionally you have,
I think so. Yeah.
Improvement. It's just
great improvement in my mental health. That's for sure.
Yeah, there you go. And that's really the key. And so again, without boring you or the world too much, I mentioned briefly to you prior in our green room, but I think a fair amount of our obsession with health and diet is kind of an ancillary of success societally. If we went back to our grandparents or great grandparents' generations, they would be very, very happy to be obese, because there wasn't enough food, and they'd be very happy to be, have a median life expectancy if you pass childbirth to into the 80s and whatnot. I think that was not the standard societal norm. In a lot of places that people were running from. We had people emigrating here from lots of countries because there were famines, and the fact that our median population age has advanced is a sign of societal advancement as well. But as part and parcel of that, we are basically an older population, and we kvetch. That's a technical term, which means we want to complain about something, which is fine. And I think we have more aches and whatnot. And so we see ourselves as having these, grave metabolic problems and whatnot, but it's kind of like age is a big part of it. And the fact is, we don't really die from other cataclysmic things that people die from, heart attacks, all of a sudden and whatnot. And so because we live longer, we have this ancillary problem of living longer. So one of the successes of, the problem with living longer is you live longer. And there's a lot of, kind of gap time, especially in a society that, you're not necessarily having to put your shoulder to the what are the people with the shoulder to? Work. Yeah, to something, the millstone or whatever that is, hanging around your neck, etc. So people are doing less, they have longer time, they've got the food and so forth, they're living longer, and guess what? They're going to have, the various hangnails and arthritis and other things that are going to crop up, and they're going to make them think, oh my God, what did I do wrong in
So
my life?
I'm gonna push against you on that, in the sense that what Calley and Casey talk about is the chronic disease epidemic, especially among young people. And so what they're talking about is about obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure, the metabolic syndrome and related stuff among young people in particular, which it's true that is, it's true that everybody in this country isn't healthy. Everything they say, I agree with. Everybody in this country isn't healthy, especially if you're poor and working class. If you're like me and you're upper middle class and you can afford organic food and time to exercise and time for meditation and yoga and vacations, then you're doing great and you're going to have a really nice life, even if you have like the aches and pains that you're talking about. If you're a working class, poor person, and now also increasingly middle class person in this country, and you don't have access to that kind of food because it's too expensive, and you don't have time to exercise or relax or sleep, and you're constantly worried because you don't have money for next month's rent, then you're going to have a lot of metabolic syndromes, as they would call them. You're just going to be unhealthy. And I think that's what a lot of people in this country have. And so I agree with everything they say about that. The problem is that what they're doing is and this is not a new problem. We know about processed foods and super processed foods, they like to call it. They make up these categories. And we know that a lot of people's diets are really bad, especially children. The problem is not that. The problem is that in the last 4 years, since the rollout of the mRNA COVID shots, there has been an enormous rise in autoimmune disease, infertility, cancer, autoimmune cancer, infertility, heart disease in young people.
Yeah.
That's a huge one, right? So what Casey and Calley's job is to say, oh, yeah. There's a huge increase in infertility and cancer, in autoimmune diseases, in heart disease. And all of this has been going on for a long, long time. So let's look at the last 30 years. Let's not look at the last 3 or 4 years. Let's not talk about the proximal cause of it. Let's just talk about these general toxic stews that we're all in our, there's toxic chemicals in our environment and there's toxic chemicals in our food. All true. This is all true. It's been going on for ages. People have been calling it out for many decades. But there's an acute problem here, which is the mRNA vaccines that we're not going to talk about. Not only are we not going to talk about it, but we are going to obscure and hide the harms that those things are causing by putting out studies. And I can show you studies that are being put out constantly, and that they started putting out in 2021, that say either that heart disease in young people and autoimmune, all the things that the COVID shots cause, are actually either caused by COVID, or they give you this long timeline and say these things have been rising forever, and now they're just at an all-time high because, I don't know, because they've been going on forever and now they're still going on. Not to mention deaths from the COVID shots, which they're never going to talk about, in which there's so many efforts to, every database has been corrupted, and every, government tracking method has been either hidden or corrupted or, changed. So there's a huge global effort to hide the harms of these vaccines, and they're just a little tiny aspect of that. Yes. So the sequence. So this is how it goes. This is the play, as I call it. Here's what you say: we want our kids to be healthy. Yes. We want all people to be healthy. Yes. It's all interconnected with all the systems. Sure. With all the issues. Yeah. Let's make it super, super general, because people like me and the medical freedom movement and the people who propelled RFK Jr. into the position in which these people found him in order to throw him in with Trump, we all care about why specific things are being caused by specific items that were forced upon the entire world's population, namely the COVID vaccine. So yeah, let's just talk about it in general. Then let's say we live in a toxic stew. Yes, there's terrible chemicals everywhere. This year in 2024, the highest rates in American history of Alzheimer's, cancer, autoimmune conditions, heart disease, diabetes, cancer, they said it twice, kidney disease, autism, every single chronic disease you could think of is at an all-time high, right? So they're giving us those diseases, and they mention autism in knowing that our movement cares about the vaccine connection to autism, not just the mRNA vaccines, but all vaccines. But they're going to just group that all together with the chronic disease epidemic that's been happening forever and the toxic stew that we're in. So let's not look at anything specific. And then what are we going to do about it? Bobby is going to instruct the NIH with President Trump to do unbiased research on every single area that impacts American public health. That's what they're going to do. How does that sound in terms of a solution, a non-solution to a non-problem, and a non-solution to a non-problem which hides the actual solution to the actual problem, which is A, get the mRNA products off the market, and B, let's talk about how they got there in the first place. So that's the play.
Yeah. No, I see your point there. I'm going to put what might seem like a slightly unrelated point out there. So the opioid epidemic, which is something I have an interest in, I treated ancillary to my primary care practice. I treated narcotic addiction to sobriety through a temporary program using Suboxone to get people in about 3 or 4 months from addiction to sobriety, not maintenance and not quick detox. And we always talk about the opioid epidemic, and it's been going up and up and up and up. The only time it didn't go up in recent memory is the first 3.5 years of Donald Trump's presidency, and it was almost not talking. There was all this with some of the mainstream, legacy media. May they rest in peace. Is they have sins of commission and sins of omission. And so sometimes the stories are wrong. Sometimes the fact they just don't cover anything unless it's with it until it doesn't breathe. And the opioid story, when they can have something like, during George W. Era, the troops coming, the deceased troops coming back from Iraq, they cover every plane load with the flag, corpses and caskets and whatnot, sad. And then when Obama was president, they just stopped. And conversely, they covered the opioid epidemic endlessly. And when Trump became president, they kind of stopped. And the reason was that there was basically a mild reduction, a tailing off. Certainly, if you know calculus, there was a diminishment in the first derivative. So it had been going up and up and just kind of leveled and decreased. And some of that was because, in my view, it's because people had the opposite of despair. They had hope, and not hope and change kind, but the actual change in hope. And so the Americans were going back to work in Middle America, Rust Belt and so forth. There was things were getting oiled, like the Tin Man, and they were kind of getting back to what they could and should be doing. And this is kind of, the real diet, in a sense, of what people want. Is they want function in their lives. They want, to be useful. They want to be doing something. And so unemployment is kind of an inflammatory agent in our bodies, in a sense. And we don't have, anyway. So here's the point of the question. A lot of what we have as kind of these ancillary issues, not the autism one, but some of the other ones, I think, are when people are not doing well. So there's an increase in mortality through diseases of despair. People are drinking more. They're taking care of themselves less. They can become more obese. As kind of a side note for health, that one of the people who are married, happily married, or just married. I'm not sure it's happily, but successfully married. They live, I think, the number 5 years longer on average than unmarried people. And it's not because marriage has a special drug or whatever, but it makes people moderate their behaviors in general. So they're less likely to do hang gliding. They're less likely to do binge drinking. They're less likely to catch certain STDs and whatnot. And so their lives are longer. And same ditto goes to going to church and community activities. So those people live longer. And there's no real medication for that. There's no special diet per se. But people, in the flow of life, they're doing more and they feel better about themselves. They take better care of themselves. So I think, here's kind of the question. some things I think are from the vaccine. The young men getting myocarditis. I think that's vaccine related, from COVID vaccine. It's very possible the number of increased cases of autism are related to the not just any single vaccine, but kind of the whole panoply we give. We give far more than we ever used to, and for problems that I think are not really related to infants, like hepatitis B. There aren't that many. I did treat narcotic addicts. I never saw any toddlers come in with that problem. So why they need hepatitis B right off the bat vaccine anyway. So. I apologize for rambling, but so here's the question. How much of this is, are we kind of battling over something where maybe there's misdirection? I think it's just kind of the lockdowns themselves brought on a lot of illness because people didn't get regular medical care, and they were depressed, and they're feeling miserable, and there was more unemployment, all that kind of stuff. How much was misery, kind of conversely to the opioid diminishment that happened under Trump when there was prosperity?
Sure. There was definitely an increase in suicidality in especially young people, and depression and all of that during COVID because of the lockdowns. Absolutely, 100%. But the other stuff is related to the vaccines. I don't know if you've looked at studies. I don't know if you know in your personal life. I know about 10 people who have had sudden weird autoimmune diseases just in the last few years. Turbo cancer. I have a friend who's 38 who's dying of turbo breast cancer right now. So these are things that are happening. And I know that I can't make that correlation. I can't make the causation. I can only make the correlation. But when there are enough correlations, studies have shown, and even the reports from the drug companies themselves and from VAERS have shown that it is causation and not just correlation. So those are things that are caused by the vaccines. The vaccines are totally toxic and poison, and even whatever it is that they're doing, and they have killed people. We know that. In February, like a month or two after they started giving them out, Pfizer had like over 1,000 deaths reported in their adverse event report that they had to submit, that they wanted to keep for 75 years and had to get FOIA'd. So 1,000 deaths just in the Pfizer reporting system in the first 2 months. So many deaths, and even no matter what you think about it, the process through which the vaccines were approved, which is the EUA process, did not require any oversight of manufacturing or of clinical trials. So the clinical trials were not actually, actual clinical trials. They also didn't have relevant endpoints. And there were whistleblowers who talked about what was actually going on there. But I also know just from researching the legal underpinnings of it, that these products have never gone through any kind of process. So if you think that that's good, that we should have products on the market that have gone through no regulatory process and that are killing and injuring a lot of people, okay.
Yeah,
but I think that's what Calley and Casey means his job is to cover that up.
Yeah, so I don't personally feel that way. I mean, I've written on this. My latest was for Brownstone on the topic was Dr. Fauci's DNA of caring, which is Fauci's own appellation for himself, that he cares so gosh darn much about humanity. He has it in his DNA, and he's got it in the his dad's pharmacy in Brooklyn, and he just can't stop caring. Anyway, that's his own term, and I obviously use it sarcastically. But yeah, no, I'm not in favor of the fact that phase 2 and phase 3 trials were never done for mRNA platform treatments and whatnot. I'm not in favor of that. However, I do understand their emergencies, and the stipulation was this was kind of like a bioweapon level problem, and it was done in a lab and was released. I think some parts of that are true. I personally don't think the disease was all that bad, as evidenced by the Diamond Princess and some of the naval boats out where people were not, especially young and healthy people, and moderate to middle aged people were not getting any real issues at all, even if not barely noticing they had it. So it's kind of a standard flu level, if lesser problem for anybody young. A few older people got it. By the time Fauci heard about it and started doing his machinations in February and March, the Diamond Princess was already a couple, 1.5 months old, and nobody from that boat had died. So I think they kind of, upgraded it and the real virus was one to get rid of Donald Trump, because his popularity was almost as high as it is now. It was above 50% in March of 2020, and he was going to cruise towards his reelection. nobody knew it was going to take another 4 years. But so I think, understanding some of the stipulations and thoughts people had, if this were genuinely a zombie apocalyptic type virus, which it wasn't, and it was obvious it wasn't, then you could theoretically get around some things to save greater numbers of the population. I think that's a reasonable calculus that we do in medicine all the time. We triage things and we take some risks given that a life-threatening situation. But the stipulations I don't think were true, and this is part of the problem with Deborah Birx et al. That they upgraded this thing, but I think they did it not to save humanity from a virus. They did it to save humanity from Donald Trump, in their view, and that's where their medicine.
So I'm going to push back against that because it was a global, coordinated NATO effort. That's what
Yeah,
COVID was.
well,
So one of the things they wanted to do is get rid of Trump. That's true. There's evidence now in writing from the German RKI leaks, so Robert Koch Institute leaks, that show that they postponed the rollout of the vaccine until after the presidential election because they didn't want it to be rolled out before. But that was not a U.S. decision. That was not a U.S. decision. That was a global, what I call the global biodefense cabal decision. So COVID was not because of Trump. Trump was one thing. Trump was one reason, that one thing that they wanted to get rid of, but there's a much, much huger agenda at play that got revealed during COVID. We can talk about it some other time. But Casey and Calley means are a manifestation of that enormous infrastructure that's in place. It's global. And it is much, much, much more dangerous than just wanting to get rid of Trump.
right. So you're talking about like 15-minute cities, having people eat bugs, that kind of stuff. The WEF, kind of like keeping humans under check, that kind of thing. Is that what we're talking about?
We're
So I
talking
think
about global technocratic totalitarianism.
fair enough. So I'm not necessarily disputing all that. I think there are a lot of people who want that, and we see it play out currently in the UK and possibly in France and so forth. Germany's got a socialist leader, whatnot. So I think there's a lot of places where people's freedoms have been abrogated and kept away, and we saw horrible things happen in Australia, New Zealand, all these places that we thought were kind of liberal, Western oriented, quote unquote, democracies and whatnot. And maybe they were democratic to a certain extent because they did what some people wanted, but I don't think that necessarily disputes my first point, which is that can also be anti-Trump. I think both those things can be true at the same time. They're going against,
both are true.
and they were going. And clearly, Trump is the antidote. If we want to like talk medically, he's the antidote to some of that stuff. And he, so I think it's kind of like a game level, a Nintendo level thing where he's the big boss, and they definitely, did everything they could, every weapon they did to get rid of him. It's just sad. It's crazy, but a lot of very simple American ideas from say 40 years ago are deemed to be antithetical towards the great global march towards progress. But it's always been that way. I mean, there's always been there's good and evil. I mean, you want to call it that? I'm not necessarily opposed to that. I think there's been better and worse.
I'll tell you a story about the opioid epidemic that I just realized recently. That's interesting, that ties into this because you were talking about that. The reason I think that they launched, so I've realized that what upsets the establishment and the powers that are in control, whether it's nationally or globally, is the potential for civil unrest. That's the most threatening thing for them because they need stability and they need the population to be under control. And so when the right in the United States realized that the Iraq War was a scam and that they were being sent to die, to fight and die for a scam, and they came back and they said, I'm never going to support the Republican Party again. And they started, and that's where MAGA, that's where the populist right started. I think that was one of the reasons why unrest started fomenting, because they realized that they were lied to. And there was a lot of unrest amongst people who are Army veterans, who are armed, who value the Second Amendment and live by it. And that group is a group that's very threatening to the establishment. It is then, and it was then, and it is now. I think right now that's the group that they're most afraid of, and that's why they're controlling Trump and they're controlling RFK. We can get back to that. But back then, I think what happened was they had to quash that unrest that was happening because it was unsettling the whole the whole duopoly, the whole Republican Democratic thing. It was making people come together from both parties, as COVID did, by the way. So when people come together from both parties and stop fighting each other, that's something the establishment hates. And they have to get them back to fighting each other. They also have to get them so that they're not physically and mentally in a good state to fight. And I think they introduced opioids. So remember how, and you probably know this from your medical training, my husband knows this from his medical training, in the early 2000s, they introduced this idea of undertreated pain, that we were undertreating pain. And that became the thing. And then doctors were all shamed into overtreating pain and using the opioids for that. And I think they did that on purpose. And I think it was done in order to create, because we had civil rights unrest among Black people in the country, which they infiltrated and suppressed. Now we were having civil unrest among poor white people and working class white people in this country. And that's who suffered the most from the opioid epidemic. And that's who they directed it at. And those were the people who were starting to realize that they were being used by the politicians and the party that they thought was representing their interests. And so I think that's where the opioid epidemic came from. Theory. I haven't gone down those rabbit holes, but that's my theory. Now, how did I come up with that theory? Because the unrest during COVID was an exact similar unrest. It was nonpartisan. It was there were no conservative, liberal, and so on. I'm very liberal. I work with extremely conservative people, so-called, I don't even use those labels anymore. But we all worked together because we realized it wasn't about that. It wasn't about Republican, Democrat. It was really about us versus the establishment and us versus the uniparty that's trying to take control of everything. And so the uniparty didn't like that. And the uniparty decided that they were going to turn us into a branded political organization instead of a grassroots civil rights movement, which is kind of what we were. And they turned us into MAHA. And they turned us into MAHA, and they linked us up with MAGA, and they linked us up with Doge and all kinds of things that are completely out of the realm of things that we should be worried about. And I'm certainly opposed to them, not MAGA, but Doge. And that's it. And they put Calley and Cassie in charge, and they told us, wow, these amazing, and you can make money, and you can be healthy, and we can do studies on every chronic disease known to man. That's it. And forget COVID. Oh, that's so 2020. We don't need to talk about that.
That's interesting stuff. So we're kind of rounded out our hour.
Okay.
I'm not sure. Did we solve humanity yet? Close.
Well, it's a start.
So I'm going to give you a chance to sum up. Then I'm going to show your Substack page and a couple of my own things. But I've got one question. Kind of, were Calley and or Casey Means politically aligned or identified before very recently? And let's stick with Calley for a second. If he was part of the Trump world, had he voted for him in 2016? Are there records of his open secrets, voting pattern, whatever, or donation pattern? And let's say that, he, I don't know, there's some kind of mystery or whiff of mystery to all this. Everything kind of all wind up happy in the end, aside from the fact that there's not adequate emphasis on vaccine injury?
I don't think it's happy at all.
Okay.
I just put out a Substack article today, so that tells how unhappy I am.
So are you would you rather have had Kamala Harris win or Trump win?
I didn't vote. I don't care.
Okay. So which would be better for any of the concepts that you're promoting, a Trump victory or Harris victory?
Neither.
Okay.
They're both equally as bad.
All right.
In different ways, of course. They're both different. I mean, DEI is terrible, but so is what they want to do with the immigration, I think, on Trump's side. They gave money to Moderna, and Trump wants to give $500 billion to tech billionaires to establish AI printers that are going to print mRNA vaccines for cancer. I mean, it's exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same people. Soros plus, so my equation is Soros and Gates plus Kamala equals Elon and the other tech billionaires plus Trump. It's the same thing. It's the same. And by the way, and Gates goes both ways. So Gates is now best friends with Trump.
So you and I disagree on that. But Which one of those two, putatively, President Trump or President Kamala, would have hired RFK Jr.? And would you have voted for RFK Jr. had he been in the race, even quixotically, say with zero chance of winning?
He's the only one I would have voted for, yeah.
Okay. So if he had been on the Democrat ticket, if it had been a Kennedy-Trump race, you'd vote for Kennedy, correct?
No, I wouldn't vote for him on any ticket except his own ticket.
So if he had gone in the primary, they'd let him in the primary, and he beat off, he beat Kamala or whoever else was running, Gavin or something like that, and he wound up being the standard bearer for the Democrat Party, and he got them to go along with his Maha, or whatever he would have
There
called
was
it.
no Maha. It's
I know
not Maha.
he wouldn't have had that, but whatever. That same concept of what he is and what he represents, and he were the Democratic stand bearer. It was his party. Would you have voted for him against Donald Trump? It was
Absolutely.
1-1. Yes.
Absolutely. 100%.
Okay. So then scenario 2 is the more likely one, which is what happened, and everything happened to the point where he didn't align with Donald Trump. So if he had stayed in the race, and then we have a tripartite kind of Ross Perot effect, we don't know what's going to happen. That there's a third party candidate, John Anderson, and so forth. And so now you have RFK Jr., who's going to not win. Like we all acknowledge not going to win. Is going to be John Anderson or Ross Perot. He's going to get something and possibly tilt it some which way we don't know. Whom would you have voted for in that scenario? Kamala.
RFK.
Okay,
I
fine.
would only vote for RFK. I would not vote for anybody else. I think neither of the other ones.
You have the trust in RFK, and do you think he can? I mean, I don't know why he kind of exaggerated.
I did, but I don't anymore. So I don't know. I don't have any trust in him anymore because I think he's been somebody's controlling him right now.
Oh, can it not be himself? I mean, I'm not sure who's really able to control the guy at this point. Maybe Donald Trump could if he's the HHS secretary at Donald Trump's bidding and selection and whatnot. And
no, I mean right now, not even. I mean before he became HHS. I think HHS is a useless, meaningless position unless he goes in there and immediately revokes all the PrEP and EUA emergency declarations. If he does that, that will restore my faith.
All righty. And so I'm a Trump kind of guy, and I find him, imperfect, but clearly the, vast lesser of two evils, and frankly, a voice for good at this point. He's doing so much wonderful stuff and cutting down the administrative state and getting rid of a lot of the barricades, bringing us, freedom of speech and helping the world. I think it's going to be an incredible moment worldwide. And I think a lot of the progressivist, restrictionist, whatever you want to call it, dark types, WEF, people who want to, take away liberty, the anti-liberty. I think he is anti-liberty. He's pro-liberty, and it's going to have repercussions, ramifications around the world. Anyway, so I don't necessarily see it as, I see it as no harm, no foul if Calley Means exaggerated himself and managed in some way to get RFK and Trump to align, because I think it's a positive. And I'm much more an Elon Musk guy than a George Soros guy. I think not all billionaires are cut from the same stripe, and you're either pro-liberty, pro-founders. I'm kind of a founderist as far as I'm taking this from Andrew Klavan. As far as the U.S. government goes, I think the founders had a lot of wisdom. They put something in a very durable document, which has been probably not the perfect one, but the most nearly perfect amongst all the founding documents on Earth. And so I think it's a very interesting experiment we have here, and clearly there's been an exceptional country in many, many ways. So I'm not sad if in fact Calley Means did that. And I'm kind of, I see it kind of as a politician thing, that politicians exaggerate because that's what they do somehow. They're in the spotlight, and it's got to be, an everything moment. But do you blame? So here's the question part: Do you blame Calley for, getting RFK out of the race, or are you in any way happy that he put them together, Trump and RFK Jr., that would result in the possibility of RFK being the guy you want in a role at HHS?
I don't blame Calley for anything. Calley is just a tool. And I am not happy that he was sent to get them together. That's not, he's just
Who would send him then? Who's the angel?
Who would send him? Who would send Deborah Birx to be the head of the COVID task force?
But this would be something. These are inimical parts. I mean, one would want Trump's defeat, and one would want Trump's success. So,
therein lies the rub. This is not a Democrat Republican thing. That's what I was trying to say before. So I understand that you're excited about national politics, and I'm not. because I think that national politics is no longer very relevant to what's happening in the world. And I think that's what COVID taught me. What COVID taught me was that what's relevant is global, very boring, I hate this phrase, but it's global public-private partnerships. So what Elon represents to me, and again, it's not personal, none of this is personal. And tell me if the founders intended this. For the richest person in a country to, as a private citizen, be then partnered with and given the role in government, never having been elected, to tell the government how to spend public funds, tell publicly elected officials how to spend the public purse. I think that is a travesty. I don't care who it is.
It's the executive branch. It's the money going to the executive branch. He's not, the Medicare dollars or whatever, I don't think are going to be under his purview. But I think there's vast inefficiency going on throughout government. We see that over and over again. There's huge duplication. They have a whole. I spent an hour earlier this week with Dr. Robert Malone and talking about OTAs and FARs, how the government contracts with business and so forth. There's one inefficient method that was supposed to be solved by another, also hugely inefficient method. They don't deal like regular businesses that have to make a profit. It's a very odd model because a fair amount of things that government wants and has created in defense and biodefense and so forth are for hypotheticals, for scenarios you don't want to have happen. So it's not something like going out and buying shoes or a mattress or something like that we happen to need at any given moment. It's kind of quasi-apocalyptic wish or wish avoidance, so that somebody else doesn't get to do something bad to you. So it's like, how much fire protection do you need? How much insurance you need? How much flooding? It's hard to say, and the government kind of has to be omniprotective as far as some of those things go. But anyway, so it's a difficult mechanism. But in some of the less essential agencies, which are frankly almost all of them, there's huge efficiency.
I would say defense is one of the ones that we need to cut by about 3/4, for instance. And I don't think that the biggest defense contractor is ever going to do that. And the biggest defense contractor is Elon Musk. So that is already a conflict of interest right there. If you want government efficiency and you want somebody to look at the biggest spending item in the budget aside from Medicare and Medicaid, and he's not going to cut that.
Very blasé and blithe about his own potential at-risk portfolio for saying and doing the right thing. This famous interview, at various points he was going to be cut out from advertising in certain platforms. He said certain things, and his interviewers, I'm not going to quote him exactly, but it's, basically, go GFY, go screw yourself. I am going to do what I think is right. I'm going to say what I think is right. He's a different cut of cloth from your normal, mogul and so forth. I mean, he's not Mark Zuckerberg. He doesn't cower. He doesn't bend and so forth. He's going to say, and he has he put his whole fortune. I mean, Twitter would easily have become vestigial had Kamala Harris come into being. And they talked about, basically lawfaring him out of existence. And I think they're perfectly capable of doing that, or they would have been capable of doing it. And this is a huge victory, and whether, I don't think he was doing that to put money in his pocket. He already had money. And if he had just, cared about preserving the money, he would have done the Mark Zuckerberg route or the route of, Eric Schmidt or whatever, a whole bunch of, moguls who just kind of sit there silently, kind of go along. So I think he's different. And anyway, that's a kind of a topic for another time. Yeah. And I do want to have people learn about you and follow you as well. So we can put up here the eponymous Debbie Lerman at Substack, Debbie Lerman. And so people can, find your stuff here and read about you. And let me get my glasses on because there's some other tabs here. And you are also Debbie Lerman here, same name. You're a Brownstone Fellow. And here's some of your articles, including very recently, Pandemic Response. I gather you have a book coming out shortly, and people can find that. What's the title of it?
It's called The Deep State Goes Viral.
Excellent. And so if people want to find or follow me and help support this video cast, one thing they can do very easily is go buy my book. It's unrelated to anything we've been talking about here. You could probably find some similarities because Dr. Fauci figures into it. And frankly, if we had been a little bit more alert about Zika and all the exaggerations therein, we might not have fallen for some of the ones about COVID. So this is my book. You can buy it, even better if you read it, but at least buy it. You can find me as well on, I've got a web page here. It's got my name on it. I have a lot of my videos up, all different topics, from economics to certain aspects of world affairs, to a lot of COVID things. And I also write for Brownstone as well. And speaking to the narcotic part, the Purdue is in the news right now. Letitia James and other states' attorneys general have managed to increase the Purdue Pharma Sackler, I could say basically pound of flesh, $7 billion worth or something like that. I think it was done wrongly. I think they were scapegoated for this. They only had 4% of the market share of narcotics at any given moment. And this speaks to my methadone concept about opioid. We can go into that, and this is kind of the opioid epidemic origin theory if they read this article. And there's Dr. Fauci's DNA of caring and a bunch of others. Anyway, so they can find me on Twitter, X, at my name. Let's see if we can just find that up here. Here I am, handsome guy. So they can find me at Dr. Randall Bach. And that pretty much rounds out our hour. Let me just see if I can get back to our video here and pull us up. So thank you, Debbie, for coming on. I think it was a great discussion. And we shall see as we see, right?
Thank you so much for having me. This has been really a great conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. So is that a community college? I never really figured it out.
Just as much as Yale is.